Welcome to the IAB UK Podcast.
Hello and welcome to Futurescape 2030 and Beyond, a brand new 5-part mini-series of the IAB UK Podcast, where we're exploring how advertising, media, consumer behaviours and technology will evolve over the coming years. I'm James Chandler, the IAB's Chief Strategy Officer, and over the next few episodes, I'll be joined by experts from across the ad industry to unpack key trends from our Futurescape research, all from the comfort of my own living room. Futurescape is our most future-gazing project to date, designed to help advertisers, agencies and media owners make sense of where we're heading and what it will take to thrive in the years ahead. And a quick note before we get started: if you're listening to this in your ears right now, you can also watch this episode in full over on the IAB's YouTube channel. To kick things off, we're diving into the idea that content won't just be king by 2030, it'll reign supreme. As the lines between channels blur, the value of high-quality, culturally resonant content is only growing. And it means we all need to be thinking beyond traditional channel definitions. To explore what this actually means, I'm joined by two brilliant guests. Pippa Scaife, Director of Digital Advertising at Sky Media, and Lauren Dick, Managing Director of Media and Commerce at Mail Metro Media. From changing newsroom models to the rise of video, we're looking at how content is reshaping the media landscape and why that's a big opportunity for advertisers. Let's get into it. Thank you both very, very much for joining us. Pippa, these sort of Venn diagrams are all starting to blur between who distributes the content, who creates it. Is it an opportunity for Sky, or do you see it as a threat, or is it kind of a tension that you're holding at the moment?
I wouldn't say it's a tension. You know, I totally agree with what you're saying. Content is king. I think content has always been king. I suppose what's happening at the moment is that accessibility for that content is easier than ever. You know, as we see all of these different channels proliferate and merge, as you say, in that big Venn diagram, it becomes easier than ever for people to access that content. And that can only be a massive opportunity, especially I think for a player like Sky. You know, you can sort of see it happening in real time. If I look at the numbers on Sky, 90% of new Sky customers are coming in through a streaming product. So that might be Sky Glass, Sky Stream, Sky Q, it might be Now, or it might be one of the fast channels that we've created and distributed on someone else's platform. That is radically different to the business that existed at Sky 20 years ago. So as an industry, and certainly as a brand at Sky, we're starting to recognise that you can't have that single point of access. You can't have that single type of connection with your consumer. And that's allowing us really to connect at a deeper level, ultimately still leveraging, you know, that content piece. And that's before we've even started to touch upon those kind of third-party platforms like YouTube, like social, that are giving us an opportunity either to meet an entirely different kind of audience again, or to connect with them at different moments in the day. So it's a massive opportunity. And from a commercial point of view, I think it's particularly exciting because with every new platform, with every new type of distribution, there's also just a slightly different ad model. You know, there's a slightly different format that you can lean into, or there's a different buying mechanic. And that's enabling us to bring in more brands than ever into that content ecosystem. Thinkbox, I think, printed recently, maybe a couple of weeks ago, that in 2024, there were 932 new to TV advertisers, which is a massive number, right? And that's not huge brands. It's not Heinz waking up one day and being like, oh, we should give this TV thing a try.
That's all right.
You know, they've been doing it for years. These are SMEs, they're D2C businesses who probably have been buying hyper-targeted ads on Meta or Google, and suddenly have a way of coming into this real, like, premium content-driven TV ecosystem because of all the things that we've just talked about. So it's a massive opportunity for both brands like Sky, but also I think for the end consumer.
Yeah. And the Mail has a massive, diverse audience and you can capture lots of people there. Is it the same for you though? Are you finding these new audiences in different pockets? I mean, podcasts has been huge for the Mail. You're as much a podcasting business as you are a kind of a news brand.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Pippa has said there in terms of it creates an opportunity for us to find new audiences, meet new consumers kind of on the platforms where they are, and then think about bringing the best of our storytelling and our journalism to a different audience, and then making sure that we tell that in a different way and meet users where they are, but in a way that is native to the platform. So it definitely creates a huge opportunity for us in terms of expanding our content and expanding the audiences that we have who engage with the Mail portfolio. Podcasts, as you say, is one element of that, but so is our TikTok audience, is a completely new, different generation of users to us. Similarly, our YouTube and long form content, they all represent different storytelling opportunities. And we are very lucky in that the business really understands that we need to resource that quite differently and think about having very young producers on TikTok or having expert video makers for YouTube and expert podcast makers and Jamie and his team. I think one of the things that has really come out of the last sort of 2 years is the commonalities between that storytelling.
Right.
So I'm entirely paraphrasing from someone else in the video team, but they talk about how our content is recognizable. So you will see our IP front and center and you understand straight away that that's coming from the Mail portfolio. The fact that it is repeatable. So it's kind of franchise content that we can put out on a daily, weekly, and really meet the news cycle agenda. And it gives us an opportunity to your point, Pippa, on brands can fit into that because we're creating it so often and on a really regular cadence. And that it is relatable. So it's really authentic to the platform. It's told in a storytelling capacity that really works and resonates with the different users across those different channels.
How do you remain really distinct though? I mean, you talked about that first point was that it feels like it's Mail IP. It feels like it's from there. You get that kind of instant thing. When everyone's doing everything in all of these spaces, everyone's trying to get into podcasts, everyone's trying to get into short form and TikTok. How do you make sure you still cut through and it is still fundamentally a Mail thing, that it's still a Sky thing? How do you do that?
So I think it's having the right people is first and foremost, and they really are experts at what they do in each of those channels. There is an element of having a really recognizable brand and really recognizable logo, and I'm sure that's also true for Sky, and making sure that we include that throughout. We think a lot about creating content franchises with their own title, their own brand, their own identity, and then almost running everything from that. So true crime and the trial of ... is a really great example of that from the podcast space, where it becomes recognizable in its own right. And then you can see when you look at it on any of the channels that you're listening to it from, that it's brought to you by Daily Mail.
Yeah. And same for you, because all of these spaces, they require a different type of storytelling, but there still needs to be a thread. I mean, it still needs to feel inherently Sky or one of your brands, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you sort of touched on the problem there, that everybody feels like they need to be everywhere. And I think that's maybe you need to kind of do away with that mentality from the beginning as you're looking at the ecosystem now. As everything has become more fragmented, we've seen this kind of panic set in within the industry where everyone's like, I need a hit podcast because Gary Lineker's got one. Yeah. I need to have the most followers on TikTok because the Daily Mail are doing it really well. You know, I need to put all of my long form content on YouTube because Channel 4 have started doing that. And sometimes there is a bit too much looking around the industry and trying to follow those trends, and perhaps not enough of that internal viewing and figuring out actually, what are you really good at and how do you stay true to that that tone of voice and, you know, that positioning that most of these businesses have spent decades carving out for themselves. You use the word authenticity, and I think that's bang on. You've got to stay authentic to your brand. YouTube, I think, is a really interesting platform to look at for this, because YouTube is a long tail business, right? There's 47 million creators on YouTube. And what we've seen over the last few years is very established businesses coming on there, and rather than recognizing that YouTube is kind of servicing niche by virtue of the fact that it's got so many creators, they've looked at it and said, well, we need to compete with everyone who's creating content on YouTube. What Sky did very well, I think, from the beginning was say, we're not going to compete with everyone on YouTube. We're not going to go and churn out a load of UGC content. we are going to recognise that Sky is synonymous with premium, and we will stand out within YouTube by virtue of the fact that we are premium in the sea of UGC content. And that serviced Sky very well. You know, Sky Sports, to take an example, one of the biggest channels that we have, is in its 10th year of consecutive growth. It's got 15 million followers. And that's because they came on and they said, we are going to do what we do best. We're going to stay premium. We're going to stay true to our tone of voice. And actually, because Sky has now become sort of synonymous with premium on YouTube, that's really carried on throughout our commercial journey. And we now resell for lots of other premium publishers on YouTube who have kind of taken the same approach. So Sky actually is one of the biggest resellers of advertising on YouTube in Europe. We resell for the likes of Fremantle, for the likes of Lab Bible. And all of that, I think, comes from the fact that from day one, Sky said, we know who we are and we're going to stick to that regardless of where our content's being distributed.
I do think that's really important, what you said about everyone feels they have to be everywhere. And there is definitely an element of that. But I think that the way that we look at it is more as a fail fast opportunity. So if we try everything, some things will work much better than others. And then that gives us an opportunity to lean in and really scale those platforms or scale those content series that are working, rather than trying to expect the same success and the same results from everything that we put out, because that's just not the nature of content. Is that some will really land and capture the zeitgeist and go grow phenomenally, and some will be a bit of a slow burn. Some will maybe be a one series and it doesn't quite scale in the way we expected, so we move on to the next. And that's the beauty of everything being content led, is it really allows you to look at exactly what the response is, what is the data telling you, and how can you either lean in and do more or think about how we tweak it and move on.
It's that kind of culture is so synonymous with lots of the American-based, California, West Coast companies, this kind of move fast, you know, break things, fail fast, all these things. Have you seen that shift over time? Because at the heart of it, I guess the Mail is a brilliant news brand, long-standing, some people might say quite traditional in its value. You're describing something completely different here. So has there been that transformation?
Yeah, I mean, the last 2 years have been a complete transformation of our business in terms of putting digital and our future and what everything that kind of comes along with that at the heart of everything we do, and thinking about everything quite differently in terms of these are the pillars we expect to see growth from. And so how do we lean in, resource those areas, and to, exactly as I've just said, make sure that we're testing new things, we're working with other partners, we're collaborating across the industry, we're learning from our mistakes and trying to scale our business in that way, rather than, but we take the best of the heritage. So whether that's the brand, the IP, the storytelling, the news cycle, it's actually unbelievable to me that we didn't always move, because internally it's felt like we've always moved 100 miles an hour because we work to a news cycle, which is always on 24 hours a day. But yes, there's definitely been a change of pace in terms of resourcing and how willing we are to try new things and get it right or get it wrong.
A nod to the US, Pippa. I mean, we feel like our own sort of UK ecosystem is getting a bit full on, quite fragmented, lots of new opportunities. I mean, you glance to the US and it's that times 6 or 7. What things, when you look to the US, and of course in your previous role at Universal as well, what do you sort of look to the US and think that's stuff that we can take, or that's good things that have worked that we could maybe use here, or do you at all?
Yeah, you definitely do. You have to look at what's happening in the US, and I've spent the best part of the last decade working for US businesses. So people do ask me this all the time. I sometimes think it's funny that we assume all our learnings will come from the US, whereas actually the UK has been a really innovative market in this space, particularly, I mean, in digital generally, but particularly in streaming. I think about my own career history. My first interaction with Sky actually was maybe like 11 or 12 years ago, when I was working at PlayStation, onboarding CTV brands onto the PS4. And Now TV was one of the first services that I was onboarding. And, you know, just to contextualize, this is before Amazon Prime existed as a brand, or Amazon Prime Video, certainly. They were just in the process of acquiring LoveFilm, whose core business was still shipping out DVDs by post. So the fact that Sky had already at that point said, an SVOD service is probably where this business is going, and had created that and also had seen the opportunity within CTV, gives you a sense of how kind of leading the UK was as a market. I think what's different in the US is maybe that they came at streaming certainly with an ads first mentality. And if you look at the sort of fragmentation that's happening in the US generally, there is more of that ad-based thinking, more of that kind of diversity of commercial models, I suppose. You know, you mentioned that I worked at NBC Universal. Peacock launched there 5 years ago, and it was ad-supported from day one. So we often kind of look at the likes of Netflix or Amazon and say, oh, well, they're 2 years into their ad-supported journey. You know, Peacock were doing that 5 years ago. And because they were doing that 5 years ago, they've had a lot more time to adopt that sort of test and learn mentality, I think, that you were talking about, Lauren, where, you know, they've, at this point, they've really nailed that ad load because they did a lot of testing with what works well, how to create environments and formats, ad formats that are dynamic and responsive, you know, things like the pause ad, the binge ad that actually rewards user behavior. They've definitely had a lot more time to kind of figure that out. And they've also created more accessibility to that content. You know, if you look at the US market generally now, a lot more of that digital and CTV inventory is available programmatically. So that's really interesting. I think the thing that we can't lose sight of is the scale of the US market. So that testing and learning is maybe a bit more affordable if you're sitting on a streaming service in the US with a US-sized audience. So, you know, we can maybe do a little bit less of that in the UK, but we can certainly look at what they're doing in the US and take learnings from it. And I think things like ad load and ad formats are really important. But actually that accessibility piece is probably the thing that we really need to start getting right over here. You know, streaming is our opportunity to democratize TV, exactly as I was talking about earlier. And we need to make sure that we're staying on that path.
I think to add to that, I completely agree. But the scale of the US is impossible to ignore in terms of looking at business mechanics and growth strategies. But one of the things, considering we're talking about content, that I think is really standout is it's culturally very different. So what works in each market won't always be the same.
People
and
always
stuff
assume
will
that it will.
Exactly. Because we have the same language, people think it translates. But actually, if you think about the humour, what we find funny, the nuances of our culture, and even the fact that there's loads of studies into people like to listen to their own accents back. And so trying to take and just sort of retrofit it into another market isn't always the best approach. So I totally agree on like the mechanics of certainly the ad models and the commercials and the business strategy. But thinking about content, we have to think quite localized sometimes in what's going to work and resonate for those audiences.
There is definitely truth in that. But actually, if you look at what's happening, particularly with the bigger global streaming services, there is more of a global shift towards long form content production, I think, more so than ever. I think short form is almost moving in the opposite direction.
I completely agree. I think more I'm talking about social video, vox pops, going to the take to the streets kind of thing is definitely where we're leaning into that local opportunity. But you're absolutely right. The sort of longer form, like alternative to, I mean, it would have been like the studios at one point, and now it's the streaming platforms, is definitely more globalized.
Yeah, and actually that globalization is not just coming from the US, which I think is what's really exciting. You know, we're seeing massive global hits being born out of France and Korea, you know, countries that don't speak the same language as those major markets like the US and the UK. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity.
When you think about audiences, how important is it to be reaching new audiences in all of these different... I mean, you'll know your core Sky audience really, really well, but how important is it to reach different audiences on these different platforms with, as Lauren was saying, different stories?
Yeah, it's really important. I mean, why wouldn't you want to reach new audiences? And all of these different platforms and channels definitely allows that. You know, Sky Media's YouTube portfolio now reaches 20 million adults in the UK. Wow. So that's a huge number. And actually, if you drill down into that, the type of audience that you're reaching is maybe looking a little bit different as well. So Sky Sports, for example, 61% of the audience that we reach on YouTube are 15 to 34. So, I mean, you'd expect to see that younger demographic, but it's exciting to have that connection. I sometimes think that rather than thinking about whether it allows you to meet a different audience, what's more interesting is how it allows you to meet that audience, because, you know, Sky being more of a kind of legacy broadcaster traditionally would have connected with that audience at kind of specific times in the home on that big screen environment. Now, because we're on all of these other channels, we're connecting with people, you know, while they're on a bus, while they're sitting in the pub waiting for their mates. It's a very different type of connection. And again, you know, I use Sky Sports as the example. 39% of our YouTube viewership is happening on TV. And there's growth in that number, which is interesting. You know, we're all excited about the YouTube CTV positioning. But actually, that means that over 60% are those people who are just taking Sky Sports with them on the go and weaving it into their everyday. And that feels like a really interesting and meaningful connection point. The other thing that I would say, and we see this across the board, but Sky News is particularly interesting, is that these digital channels actually are allowing us to figure out where our global audience is, which again is a slightly different way of thinking about Sky as a brand and how it's positioned. And, you know, with news in particular, I think quality journalism finds its audience wherever that audience might be. So many of the stories that happen in our platform are global stories. And now that we've got the opportunity to not just put out clips on our social chat platforms however they need to go out, but actually have live streams within platforms like YouTube, we can really start to find that global positioning. And you know, that's a totally different way of thinking about Sky moving forwards.
Yeah.
And I think different audiences want different things from your content. So if you think about our YouTube content, people are watching that for 15 minutes at a time. And that often isn't how you engage with flicking through the news headlines in the morning. So that there's different use cases for the different types of content. And similarly, I don't think any of our TikTok content is being watched. A single video is not being watched for 15 minutes. They aren't even 15 minutes long. So we have to think about what is the user mindset, and are we creating content that is entertaining, is useful, is something that they want to engage with on that platform. So it becomes quite a skill to actually do the storytelling and really stay true to the heart of what we do in terms of breaking news, but also all of the lifestyle and all of the other categories of content that we do in a way that's on brand, but that's right for that user. So we think very much about being user first. Is this right for the platform? And are we doing the storytelling? And you see that come through because a lot of the time we will be reporting on the same thing. So let's say it's something quite dry, like the new budget,
Very
that
dry.
looks completely different in our paper, on our TikTok, but it's the same core thing that we're reporting on.
Yeah. Be remiss of me not to ask about measurement, because we should, and with the IAB, and we care passionately about it, because advertisers tell us they do. In being in all of these new spaces, these new platforms, these different types of videos, different lengths, different people, does it make the measurement question more complicated?
Yes, definitely. I think that there's a huge shift to people thinking much more progressively beyond sort of last click and all of the sort of very traditional digital metrics. To be much more holistic in their approach and thinking about sort of the MMM models that we're seeing come through. I think one of the challenge, and there are really great opportunities for us to lean into attribution. Some of the platforms kind of come with that out of the box solution, which is great. But the sort of omni multi-channel, however you call it, sort of how you stitch that all together, I think is still a utopia that's a little bit out of reach. And sort of as we get closer to it and something will change, or I think you made the point earlier that actually all of the platforms come with slight nuances in what counts as X or what counts as a view. So you have to be very mindful of making sure that you are not only building the tech to join all the dots, but also how do we build a sort of commonality in like what good is, what's effective. And actually, even if we built that as an industry standard, different brands would have different opinions, different holding codes would have different opinions. Everyone would want to trade on slightly different mechanics. So I think that whilst there's a massive shift to getting some of the bedrock pieces of it right, there's always going to be nuance in what good looks like. And I'm actually sometimes really surprised by pure play e-commerce brands who you think would be in all they wanted to know would be sales. And then they come to you with what I would think of as like really, really high level brand mechanics that they're looking at. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, it's kind of how not only can we get it right and kind of tie all of the measurements together, but then seeing how those translate into media strategies and buying strategies and actually how they're applied across the industry.
Yeah.
And that there isn't a universal quality to that yet.
No, I wish there was.
I was hoping you were going to jump in and say, oh, yes, here we go.
We've nailed it.
We've solved it. We'll white label it to you, Lauren, and
thanks.
we'll sort it all out. No, I mean, it's the impossible question, isn't it? We'd all love to get there. Every time I meet a planner and I'm talking them through the portfolio of what we have, you know, whether it's Sky or when I was at NBC or CNN before that, the thing that always goes through my mind is how hard that job must be.
Yeah.
Because every time you're building a campaign, actually you're building like 5 to 10 sub-campaigns.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out how you stitch it all together is really, really hard. And I think every business is figuring out a way to do it. You know, we launched last week, actually, a media optimization tool, which is kind of an automated way of optimizing across multiple channels.
Right.
And the long-term vision is there anything with an API we can plug into that. So you could, in theory, have your YouTube and your TikTok and whatever else sitting all being automatically optimized within one campaign. But it's really hard to do that because, as we all know, so many of the platforms that we've talked about in this conversation, the really valuable scaled platforms, are walled gardens, and there isn't a lot of data sharing that's happening in and out of those platforms. So any kind of optimization or outcomes-based measurement kind of becomes a little bit impossible because you don't have that deduplication piece that is so important for all of those metrics.
Yeah.
I do think that there are shifts happening. The challenge, even in getting those shifts, is exactly what you say, Lauren. We all have a different viewpoint and a different definition of what it even is that we're trying to measure. You know, a view on TV and a view on YouTube are two very different things. And there's work happening, like Barber doing some great work at the moment to try and consolidate those things into a single currency. Jeff Fields at Sky, who I'm sure loads of people listening to the podcast will be familiar with, is kind of leading the charge on that. And that will have a massive change, I think, in how we think about omni-channel solutions. But it's a very complex thing to achieve. And we're always talking about fragmentation in terms of the end point to the consumer, how you get your content. What we forget about is that for all of those fragmented distribution points, there's even more fragmentation happening on the back end, different ad servers, different SSPs, different data platforms. And to really get to true omni-channel measurement, all of those things need to be working in harmony.
Yeah.
So it's just an incredibly complex thing to navigate.
And it doesn't stand still. I mean, you've sort of said it yourself. There's always this new shiny thing that's coming. Okay, how do we figure out for creators and influence? You know, there's always going to be something new that comes as well. To finish on a less point that's kind of in the weeds, we've talked about content here. I would love recommendations from the both of you, and of course they can be Sky, and of course they can be from the Mail. Content or content makers that you would recommend to people listening and watching, your faves?
I'm obsessed with Hacks at the moment.
Okay.
Are you watching Hacks?
Not watching Hacks.
Oh, it's so good. It's on Sky Max, but actually I watched the first series on Amazon Prime and I binged it all. I think I watched it all in a day. And now I'm watching it on weekly releases. So I sort of feel like I've gone back to a more traditional viewing model and I'm really enjoying it, actually. I'm like building up that suspense. It's about a comedian duo. One is in her 70s, one is in her 20s, and they're writing together. It's so funny.
Very nice.
And the other thing that I'm really enjoying at the moment is Grand Slam Track, which is on TNT.
Okay.
which is you both totally blank
Racing?
face.
Completely blank face.
yeah.
No
No, it's
idea.
athletics. It's this
Oh, of
thing.
course.
Michael Johnson's created it. It's really fascinating. So it's an athletics competition, but everyone has to do 2 events. So if you're a sprinter, you have to do like the 100 and the 200, or the 200 and the 400. Or if you're a hurdler, you do the 100-meter hurdles and the 100-meter flat. And every, I think there's 4 events over the summer. At each one, whoever wins their 2 events wins 100 grand.
Wow.
Just there, they just give them 100 grand for winning it. So it's some of the best sprinters in the world, but you are literally watching them run for money. It's absolutely amazing TV.
Very good. Very good. Can I have a podcast one from you, please?
Yeah, so obviously from our portfolio, mine would be the trial of specifically Lucy Letby.
Yeah.
So I have a weird amount of my friends are doctors, and it's one of the first times where I've almost like seen our content in the wild and the reaction to it, where I'd obviously left my phone for a few minutes, came back to hundreds of WhatsApp messages, and all of them were debating this podcast and what they'd said and whether that was true and what the consultant had done and how he should have known and blah, blah, blah. I was like, what is this? What are you all referring to? And they sent the link. I was like, oh, it's one of ours, which is amazing to get that like, oh, it's in the wild and I'm getting the feedback from it. So, yeah, it's a testament to sort of how far and wide what those audiences could look like and getting to see that live feedback to it. So, yeah, it would be the trial of series. I think the other thing that I would say is where we're talking a lot about all of like the multi-platform distribution. And sometimes that's very contrived and it's part of our business strategy and everything that we've kind of touched on today. Sometimes you see it just happen very organically. So I was obsessed with, I think it's called The City Is Ours, and it's like Scouser, Mobland, and it's so good. It's so gripping. It's a BBC programme. It's so gripping. But they do at all of the weddings and funerals, and obviously there's a lot of those in this programme, they do this House of Bamboo dance, and it's very simple, this like box steppy dance with a clap at the end.
Right.
But that then became this like TikTok phenomenon. So I'm watching people who are all ages dancing to House of Bamboo. And then for their announcement of the second season, they've just done the cast doing the dance as the trailer for series 2.
Very nice.
And I was like, it's such a perfect execution of it was part of the content. It was really fundamental to the storytelling of the programme. And then it became this sort of like viral sensation. And then they've made it part of their advertising strategy for the series 2. So that's kind of just a great way of seeing how all of them can connect by content. But it looks like the actual length of the video and the storytelling is very different on each of the channels.
Awesome. I wish we had time for more. We don't, sadly. Pippa, Lauren, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So there you have it. Lots of recommendations for brilliant content you should be watching and listening to. A huge thank you to Pippa Scaife from Sky Media and Lauren Dick from Mail Metro Media for a brilliant conversation. And we covered everything from finding new audiences to evolving measurement and how media owners stay true to their established brand whilst embracing new storytelling opportunities. And it's crystal clear that quality content truly is king. But as all of these channel barriers dissolve, it's coming to the fore like never before, whether we're talking about TV or news brands. If you'd like to explore more of the themes we've covered here, head to our Futurescape study via the link in the show notes. We'll be back soon with the next insight-packed episode in this series, where we'll be diving into the power of communities, looking at how brands can tap into values-led, highly engaged audiences across everything from social to gaming, and why communities will be at the heart of smart planning by 2030. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
IAB UK, building a better future for digital advertising for the benefit of everyone.